The Upsilon Y mesh is configured with a white stripe going down the proximal arm and the posterior arm. I cut the anterior arm of the mesh to a size that I've determined based on the size of the patient's prolapse and her physical exam. In this case, I'm cutting it to 6 centimeters. In other words, the distance from the crotch of the Y mesh to the end of the anterior segment is 6 centimeters. I intend to use the posterior aspect first, so I'm sewing the anterior aspect out of the way so that it won't flop into my field when I'm trying to sew on the posterior side. I want the knot to be loose enough so that it will be easy for me to cut it out and release the anterior arm of the mesh without cutting the mesh itself. So I've got a scissor in here as a spacer. On this particular patient, I wanted to remove about 1 centimeter of posterior arm mesh as well. And here we have the fully prepared Upsilon Y mesh with the posterior arm measuring about 10 centimeters and the anterior arm sewn back against the proximal arm and measuring about 6 centimeters. Some of the characteristics that I consider important when selecting a Y mesh graft are material weight, strength, visibility, pliability, and when I say pliability, I mean the ease with which I can get the mesh to lay flat after intraoperative manipulation. There are several things that I like about the Upsilon Y mesh. I like the blue color, I like the white stripe on the posterior flap and sacral tail because that allows for easy orientation along the axis of the vagina and to differentiate the anterior from the posterior arms of the mesh. I also really like the way that my PTFE sutures contrast against the mesh itself. One really nice feature of the Upsilon Y mesh that I've noticed is its ability to return to its original configuration even after being folded or manipulated during insertion into the peritoneal cavity.